This entire conversation came from information that was allegedly revealed through a deleted scene from Love and Marriage Huntsville. And when I say deleted, I mean intentionally deleted, because once you really unpack what was said, it makes complete sense why production didn't want this part to air on television. Now, apparently, allegedly, there was a longer, more extended version of a scene that we only saw partially on the show. This extended version was briefly uploaded to YouTube and then later removed, but not before people caught wind of the extra details that were left out of the televised version. And let me just say this right now, the missing context matters. It matters a lot, because the version we were shown on TV painted one picture, but the extended clip paints a very different one, especially when it comes to Martell and his so-called business sense. So let's rewind for a second and set the stage properly. Y'all remember that conversation from one of the earlier episodes this season, right? The scene where Martell sat down with Chris Fletcher and Destiny. They were at lunch talking about Martell's new build, his investment property, and what the next steps were going to be. From what we saw on TV, the conversation was framed as something pretty innocent and straightforward. It looked like Martell was meeting with two real estate professionals to discuss how the property would be listed, who would be responsible for selling it, and how Destiny and Chris would work together to help him move the home once it was complete. Mel even made it seem like this meeting was intentional and business-focused, like Martell was being proactive and strategic. The whole thing was positioned as, oh, he's building another property, and now he's bringing in the right people to make sure it gets sold. That was the premise, that was the story production wanted us to walk away with. But what we didn't see is the part of the conversation that completely undermines that narrative. According to the extended clip, the conversation went much deeper than what aired. They weren't just talking about listing strategies and timelines, they were talking about Martell's history with investment properties. And that's where things got uncomfortable. Martell starts talking about this new home he's building, explaining that it'll probably take him around 9 months to finish, maybe closer to a year. He talks about grinding, working all night, putting in the work, and how Huntsville doesn't really have a lot of multi-million-dollar homes. He presents it like he's filling a gap in the market, like he's doing something innovative or forward-thinking. But then Chris, his own friend, mind you, steps in and says essentially, wait a minute. Chris reminds him on camera that the last home they built was also supposed to be an investment property. That home was supposed to be sold. That home was supposed to generate income. And yet, it didn't. It couldn't be sold and it couldn't be rented. And that's a key detail that production conveniently left out of the televised episode. What Chris allegedly exposed in that deleted scene is that Martell was unable to move the previous property at all. No buyer, no renter, nothing. And because of that, a decision was made for Arian to live in the property instead. Not because that was the original plan, not because it was a savvy business move, but because there were no other options. The house was just sitting there, empty, unproductive, not making money. And this is where my confusion begins, because I need someone to explain this logic to me like I'm 5 years old. If you build a property with the intention of selling it or renting it out, and you fail to do either one, why would your next move be to build another property with similar specs, similar pricing, and similar limitations? At what point do you stop and say, okay, this approach is not working, maybe we need to reassess? Business 101 tells us that you don't just create supply for the sake of creating supply. You identify a problem, you identify a demand, and then you provide a solution. If there was a long list of people in Huntsville desperately trying to buy multi-million-dollar homes and there simply weren't any available, then sure, building one would make sense. That would be filling a gap, that would be smart, that would be strategic. But that is not what this situation sounds like at all. What it sounds like is that these properties already exist and people are not buying them. It's not that the homes aren't available, it's that the demand is not there. So why are you continuing to pour time, money, and energy into building something that the market has already told you it does not want? That's not innovation, that's not vision, that's stubbornness. And what really gets me is that most people, after failing to sell or rent a high-end property, would take that as a learning experience. They would say, okay, maybe the price point was too high. Maybe the specs weren't aligned with what buyers in this area are looking for. Maybe the market just isn't ready for this. And then they would pivot, they would adjust, they would change their strategy. That's how business growth happens, but not here. Here, the response seems to be, let's do it again. Same concept, same type of property, same unrealistic expectations. And then we're supposed to be impressed by the fact that another build is underway? For what purpose? To say you did it? To feed your ego? To be able to tell people, I build million-dollar homes? Because if we're being honest, building a million-dollar home that nobody can afford or wants to buy is not impressive. It's inefficient, it's wasteful, and it shows a lack of understanding of the very basics of supply and demand. If most people in your area can comfortably afford homes in the $300,000 to $400,000 range, then that's where your focus should be. Those properties would sell quickly. Those properties would generate consistent income. Those properties would actually make sense as investments. Instead, it feels like Martell is choosing to operate in a space where he's not solving any real problems. He's not providing housing that's in high demand. He's not meeting a need that exists. He's just building because he wants to build, regardless of whether the end result makes financial sense. And that's what's frustrating to watch. Now, let's talk about production for a second, because this is where things get even more interesting. Why was this part of the conversation cut from the show? Why didn't we get to see Chris calling him out? Why didn't we get to hear the full context about the previous property failing as an investment? Out of everything they could have included, this was what was left on the cutting room floor. And this is why I personally feel like Martell is constantly protected by production. Time and time again, we see scenes edited in a way that presents him in the best possible light. His mistakes are minimized, his poor decisions are softened, and anything that would cause viewers to seriously question his competence gets conveniently removed. Because, let's be real, if that full scene had aired, the audience would have walked away with a very different impression. Instead of seeing a hard-working builder with vision, we would have seen someone repeating the same mistakes and refusing to learn from them. And that doesn't fit the narrative production wants to push. However, this deleted segment was apparently uploaded as a longer clip on YouTube, but has since been removed. Before it disappeared, however, viewers got to see parts of the conversation that gave us a completely different perspective on Martell and his approach to real estate. In this extended clip, Martell went into detail about the new property. He talked about finishing it in roughly 9 months to a year, working all night if necessary, and how Huntsville doesn't really have many multi-million-dollar homes. He framed this as him filling a gap in the market, like he's providing something unique that the city needs. And then, as if on cue, Chris decided to call him out. Chris reminded Martell that the last property they built was supposed to be an investment property, meant to be sold, but it never sold, and it couldn't even be rented out. Because of that, Ariane ended up living in the property. So instead of generating income or functioning as a legitimate investment, the house just sat there, empty, because Martell allegedly could not get it sold or rented. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were in that position, I'd pause, reassess, and maybe rethink my strategy for the next property. But not Martell. No, he seems to have decided that the solution to a house that didn't sell is build another one just like it. And that's where I start asking the obvious questions. Why are you continuing to create properties that have little to no market demand? It's one thing if there's a gap and people are scrambling to buy million-dollar homes but can't find them, then sure, building makes sense. That's smart business strategy. But if your previous property couldn't sell and there's no clear demand for this one, then what exactly are you trying to accomplish? Business 101 says you identify a problem and provide a solution. If there's no problem to solve, if the demand isn't there, then providing supply does nothing. And yet, Martell continues. He keeps building multi-million-dollar homes that the majority of people either cannot afford or are not buying.
It's almost baffling. Most people, after a failed sale, would take that as a learning opportunity. They'd analyze the market, consider adjusting price points or home specifications, or maybe pivot to a different type of property that's in demand. That's logical, that's smart, that's basic economics. But not Martell. Instead, he seems to operate purely from ego, like, I am a builder, I build million-dollar homes, regardless of whether anyone actually wants or needs them. And this is the part that makes me question the business sense here. It's literally supply without demand, effort without reward, and ego without practicality. And what makes this even more frustrating is that this part of the conversation was cut from the show. Out of all the clips they could have aired, they chose to show Martell in the most flattering light, editing out the section that exposes poor strategy and questionable decision-making. It's why I feel like production consistently protects him. They selectively edit to make him appear competent and strategic, while viewers never see the evidence that maybe he's just repeating the same mistakes over and over. Allegedly, Martell now has a builder's license, which supposedly he obtained a few months ago. That's great, but at this point he could just post it publicly to validate it. Transparency goes a long way, especially when there's so much skepticism about his projects. And speaking of unfinished projects, we're still waiting on the hotel build that Rasputia Jr. and Morrow were supposed to construct after winning the bid in Season 1. There have been delays, rumors, and conflicting information, making it nearly impossible to tell what's really happening. Are these projects being held up due to industry issues, or is it mismanagement? We may never know. All of this comes back to that African proverb, wisdom is chasing you, but you're faster. Business sense is chasing Martell, but he's running in the opposite direction, building high-dollar homes nobody can buy just to maintain the image of being a builder. Now that we've unpacked Martell, let's pivot to Carlos King, because he's been dropping commentary that's got people talking. Recently, Carlos made remarks about reality TV stars who quit shows because they don't want drama or negative attention. He didn't call anyone out by name, but it's clear he was throwing shade. Essentially, he said that some people sign up for reality TV, but then expect it to be sanitized, drama-free, and favorable. That doesn't really work in an industry built on entertainment, conflict, and heightened emotions. Carlos made some interesting points. He noted that many reality stars don't want to be portrayed as messy, controversial, or confrontational, which is natural. Nobody wants to be labeled as the villain or the uninteresting participant. But editing plays a huge role in this. Even if a star is behaving normally, selective editing can paint them in a negative light repeatedly, creating an image they didn't sign up for. Over time, that can make them feel trapped or misrepresented, leading to departures from the show. He also mentioned that some stars are okay joining fights that others start, but don't want to escalate or instigate conflicts themselves. Again, fair. Nobody wants to be the designated bad guy. Reality TV ideally should capture life as it happens, not force people into roles they don't want to play. Unfortunately, most shows today orchestrate drama. Producers highlight the messiest moments, and sometimes stars are made to act in ways that fit a narrative. This encourages negativity, resentment, and ultimately makes some stars reconsider their participation. Carlos even commented on stars using reality TV to showcase a business. He suggested that if that's the goal, maybe they should be on Shark Tank instead. Reality TV is about entertainment, not a business pitch platform. And he's not wrong. But at the same time, some shows have found ways to be engaging without leaning into unnecessary chaos. Hearts and Hustle Houston, for example, has carved a niche that doesn't rely on constant conflict or exaggerated drama. It shows you can be interesting without being hostile. He also referenced situations like Melody Shari's fan base, which was unfairly blamed for drama in a season of her show. Editing and selective narratives can make actions appear as retaliation, which contributes to stars leaving the show. It's a delicate balance. Fans react, stars react, production edits, and suddenly the story feels different from reality. Carlos has a point. Reality TV is tough. If you can't handle critiques or selective portrayals, it may not be the right space for you, but there's also room for creating a more positive, fair environment. Speaking of positive energy, let's talk about Melody Shari's Winter Wonderland event. Honey, this was the breath of fresh air we needed. From what I saw, it looked absolutely gorgeous. Everyone was dressed in white, the decor was stunning, and the atmosphere was joyful and celebratory. Melody clearly put a lot of thought and effort into this event. You could see the happiness on everyone's faces, the family vibes, and just the general sense of togetherness. Melody emphasized celebrating the year, wins, and victories with her community. Her message was clear: nothing could break them, and challenges only made them stronger. This was not just a party, it was a statement of unity, love, and resilience. The level of detail, from decor to food to guest experience, was impressive. She created an environment where everyone felt included, celebrated, and supported. Watching this, it's clear she deserves every bit of recognition for executing her vision so flawlessly. It's uplifting to see someone focus on connection, joy, and positive experiences rather than drama or negativity. Now, allegedly, word on the street is that Martell does have his builder's license now. Allegedly. And if that's true, great. But at this point, people are skeptical. People are questioning everything. And honestly, the easiest way to shut all of that down would be simply to post it. Put it out there. Let people see it for themselves. Because when your credibility is already shaky, transparency matters. And while we're on the topic of unfinished business, let's not forget that we are still waiting on that hotel project from season 1. Still waiting. Still no updates, still no clear answers. So at this point, it's hard to know what's real, what's delayed, and what was never actually happening in the first place. That's why this whole situation feels so messy. There are too many unanswered questions, too many half-finished projects, and too many stories that don't quite add up. And when you combine that with production selectively editing scenes, it only adds to the confusion. There's an African proverb that says, "Wisdom is chasing you, but you are faster." And honestly, that perfectly sums up what this looks like. Business sense is right there. The lesson is right there. The market feedback is right there. But instead of slowing down and paying attention, he's sprinting in the opposite direction. Because at the end of the day, business is not about what sounds good or looks good on paper. It's about results. It's about sustainability. It's about making decisions that align with reality, not ego. And building properties that don't sell is not a flex. It's a red flag. So I'll leave it there. Let me know what y'all think. Do you believe this was just innocent editing? Or do you think production is actively protecting Martell? And more importantly, does any of this business strategy make sense to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch y'all in the next one.